All right. Well, the kid is asleep, mom is asleep, and all is well. What's up, family? Another Shade Life Cafe. Doing things a little bit different this time. I've decided I wanted to try something new. I wanted to try a whole new, I guess you could say, a new approach to what we can do through conversation and mediums like podcasting and filmmaking and whatever it's called today, vlogging, content creation, whatever you want. I just look at it as ideas and thoughts being spread around through whatever form of storytelling that you have at your fingertips. That's pretty much how I look at it. Yeah, I got a couple things I wanted to share with you. In a couple of days is my birthday. Whoop whoop. I'm going to be 35 years old. I'm a 1987 baby, October. So for those of you that are into horoscopes, I guess that would be a Libra Scorpio, which I like to say that I'm an extreme, how do you put it? I'm an extreme balancer. So I'm about balance, but I'm all about passion, and I don't really know how to do anything like half turned on. Just I'm fully dialed in. And the other problem that I have, or it's not really a problem, it's just is I also have ADD. So trying to be 100% in everything that you want to do in your life is, well, it's impossible. And that's kind of been my life for the longest time. For those of you that don't know, I do a lot of different types of things in my life, but one of my favorite things is conversation. I think I gained that through, honestly, the dancer of being a journey. The journey of being a dancer. Oh my gosh, I'm dyslexic. Is that what it's called when you say things backwards? I don't know. That happens. That's also just me living in my head. So I'm, as a young dancer, you would always find yourself at different places for events, competitions, and you would always pop into these cafes at times, or even going to another city, another country, and you wake up, you want some cup of coffee, and you go sit down and you talk to somebody randomly, and you just have these really randomly open and deep conversations with strangers. And at a young age, I really was so moved by that experience, and I wanted to keep carrying it on. And part of the work that I do is always about creating space for us to have dialogue, whether it's a dialogue with ourselves or dialogue with other people. So Shade Life Cafe is just another piece of work to continue that, I guess you could say, tradition. Yeah. So a couple of things that I wanted to, I guess you could say, share is I wanted there to be like a marker of the journey. This is a podcast, somewhat experience for some, an audible, but I also enjoy the visual aspect of things. But essentially, I wanted this moment to be a marker in my life as a turning point where I move into a direction that I feel is where I've always wanted to be, I guess you could say. Some people call it a calling, some people answering what's in your heart, following your heart, whatever you want to call it. I would say that this is a turning point in my life where I really feel very strongly that I'm becoming who I've always wanted to become, and that person is not really becoming anything. It's just stripping away all the things that I have become and just being me naturally and authentically. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, this last year, as my birthday is coming up, I could tell you that when my birthday hit in 2021, life, at least as how I saw it, was at this all-time high. Like, I had the most amount of money I've ever had in my entire life because of business and hard work. And then I started acting, and I got like these random gigs that just put like a lot of money in my pocket. And I'm not talking like millionaire status, but for a dancer that is just figuring out life and has a family, it was a big deal. So here I am coming across new money, and I own a business, and I have control. And a couple weeks after that, I lost a client, and then some other unfortunate things happened within the family. And then a couple of months after that, I lost more clients, and I found myself getting bitter, but also confused. But it all happened from this weird moment. I was at this event called Rebel BC1, and it was an Orlando cipher. I got asked to judge this event, and not to judge the main competition, but to judge a side competition, which was a house and breaking battle. So it's like one house dancer, one b-boy, or one break dancer, and then it's a 2-on-2, and they battle, and I was one of the judges. And at the event, I would say the best way to describe it is I bumped into myself. And when I bumped into myself, I guess you could say I just had these realizations and this opening that whoever I was in that moment was not who I have been for a very long time, like who I naturally am. And so when I say I bumped into myself, I bumped into my authentic, natural self, where Brendan was really happy with who Brendan was. And he was surrounded by people that understood that and also didn't question that and celebrated it. And I felt a way that I haven't felt in a really long time. And it made me kind of question everything that I'm doing in my life. So while I could say all the things that I was losing after that moment, really, it was just things that I never really wanted. It's a weird situation where I could say that my life was working out the way that it should have been, right? And I realized in bumping into myself just how lost I've been for a long time. And that's a really difficult thing to accept, I must say. And I think as my 35th birthday approaches, I've come to the realization that I'm now accepting all of that. And I wanted this episode at least to be a marker of the turning point where I accept it fully and in hopes that I can develop myself as a person, as an individual that I not aspired to be, but who I've always been. Which leads me, I guess, let me take a sip of my tea. It's a nighttime thing tonight, so instead of a coffee, I'm having some tea. As this thing progresses, we should definitely have like a tea sponsor and a coffee sponsor. You know what I mean? That would be fantastic. Or a cafe, an actual cafe. Like, what if Shade Life had its own cafe? Pff, crazy, right? So my first piece of content that I ever put up on YouTube, I opened up a YouTube account. I think it was like 2014, 2015. And I opened up the account because I wanted to share a sermon that I performed. It was my first sermon I've ever really performed. And right before that sermon, I had performed a TEDx talk. And that really got my wheels turning on what's possible, I guess, with like the art of communication. So I did this sermon, and then I wanted to share it. So I just posted it up on YouTube, and I started this YouTube channel. And I didn't really think anything of it. And then I did another sermon, and I posted that. And then I was like, oh, maybe I could do like some short pieces of content, some nuggets, some words of wisdom. And then fast forward, I got super injured and I couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. And I just watched YouTube for days and I bumped into a Casey Neistat vlog, essentially. And something in me turned. I don't know what exactly it was. And at the time, I was a full-time job. I was a video producer at a university, a local university. I'm not saying local, but whatever. Big university in South Florida. And where was I? ADD is the worst. So I got this this video in my mind, my psyche, and things just started feeling unfamiliar because things felt familiar in on the interior, if that makes any sense. So I was just like, you know what, let me try to do something like that. I'll just make some short videos. I guess that's what the kids call it these days. It's vlogging. So I'll start doing that. Weirdly enough, if I rewind, one of my first projects I ever did in high school, I went to a BOCES program because my parents knew that I definitely was not going to survive in regular high school. So they took me, not out of high school, but they took me out of 4 periods and they put me into a vocational school called BOCES Brookhaven Tech. And that's where I learned video. So I learned how to, video, edit, and studio stuff. And one of my first projects I ever did that I was really proud of was an autobiography, which I'm actually scared, but I'm going to post it. And that's scary because that's like teenager work. And I'm like, I go, when I watch it, but I'm also like, wow, you did that at 15. So I'm going to put that out. And that was an autobiography about my dance journey because, not a lot of people talk about this and say it, but as a dancer, I'm under the belief fully that filmmaking is a part of hip-hop culture. That's how I grew up. That's how I came up, and I saw a lot of other people doing it as well. And when I say filmmaking, I think it's important to understand that like filmmaking is the art of telling a story through pictures in motion, right? But there's this type of filmmaking that was happening in the time of hip-hop, which was autobiographical documenting. And it's kind of like skate culture. You just kind of skate you skate and then you track your progress by documenting it. And back then it was like mini DVs, right? Or even before the VHS or whatever you used at the time. So that was just a thing that was happening when I was growing up, and I loved that part of it. And I have mini DV tapes for days about capturing moments and documenting your progress. So when I got into a BOCES program, it just was kind of natural. I was like, yeah, I do this all the time. I can make a story around it. And I made an autobiography, essentially. And some of it's pretty cringeworthy, and other parts of it is like, cool, you did that. And it tells the story. And I just got into this style, this idea of autobiographical I can't even say it, documentary style of filmmaking. And I do believe it's a part of the culture. Some people still do it, and they do it just as like fun, let's post some content. But if you ask me, if in 10 years from now when they look back at that footage, they're a different person, but it's documented. And they can say they did these moves, they were this person, oh, this is where I was in that part of my life when I used to do those moves, those rounds. There's just so much, and it reminds me of home videotapes when I would be growing up. And home videotapes, my parents, they kind of knew that our situation, because I'm adopted along with 2 sisters, that our situation was unique and that it needed to be recorded. So my parents picked up a video camera and recorded a bunch of stuff, and I have a bunch of footage from our childhood, which is great because they can pass that on. So I know that's a long rant, but this idea of vlogging got mixed into this deep kind of passion that I have for documenting your life, documenting the journey. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but my family was the type that they would take pictures and put it in albums, and you would put it on the coffee table and you'd hang out and go through the albums. Even if it just happened last year or 10 years ago, it's just a thing that you did just to look back on it. And I think one of the hard parts that I deal with today in our culture is that we don't really have that. It's just all online. It's just all content. I made up this scenario, what if in like 100 years from now they needed to reference this point of the times, and they needed to basically share and say what happened. And I was thinking about it, but what if they look back on pieces of work and all they see is people shaking their asses and partying and arguing, but you never really know exactly like what people were going through, or what parts of their life were good or bad, or what was real or fake, because it's all a blurred line. But the beauty of homemade videos is like that's how it was, that's how it is. And a lot of that also has become a style of filmmaking that people use. You talk about like Blair Witch Project, that like is arguably one of the most controversial, that's funny to say, types of work that tells a story, but it's not really filmed traditionally. It's filmed in such a way that it's like it feels it was happening on a camcorder, and that's the point. So you get, Casey, and then you get thousands of so many other people pushing out content, and a lot of it is just content. But one thing that kind of stayed with me is that although, Casey called it a vlog, I don't consider him a vlogger at all. I consider him a filmmaker. If you look at what he does, he tells stories about his everyday life, but he does it as an art form. And that is something that has stuck with me and has challenged me to re-understand what is filmmaking, and are there different ways to do this and to approach this. And then you get people like the Bucket List family that's vlogging their whole journey of traveling the world, and that was an influence. And of course Peter McKinnon's. The thing about me is that when it comes to video, I've worked all over. And I can't necessarily say that I grew up with this understanding that like cinema is the main influence, because that's not the truth for me. My influence, so much of it is LimeWire, Kazaa, Napster videos that I downloaded, and early stages of YouTube. One of my crewmates, leader of one of the artistry families that I'm a part of, which is Soul Shifters. I'm the only East Coast representative, so I'm like the care cousin. There's like this whole squad and family like all on the West Coast of the U.S., and I'm like the only one in the Lower East area. But I'm very proud to be part of that family. But the founder and leader, Free, I saw him when I was 14 years old because he was putting out, dance videos about his interpretation of dance and sharing it, and that inspired me. And really, as much as I probably bit a lot of his style coming up, he was an influence for me to find me. And that's essentially what I would say is where I'm at now, is me discovering who I am. So, sorry, I got lost in the train of thought. As someone involved in video, besides owning my own business, one of the reasons I feel like I can own my own business is because I've done so much. They always tell you in college, intern everywhere. You intern so that you can gain experience, and then you want to see if that experience is something that you want to do for the rest of your life. Well, I've done so much, and I've bumped into so many walls and said, no, this is not what I want to do. One of the first things I ever almost locked down was a career in news. I was an intern at a major news company, and I got offered a job, and something in me just said no. It was probably the conversation that I had with my executive producer. I remember one time I got in trouble for writing this piece of work. I was in like the producers section. I don't know what you would call it these days, but and I put out a story. It was like a 30-second piece, and my producer calls me in to his office, and he says, we can't air this. And I was like, why not? He's like, oh, this, and that. And I said, yeah, but that's what happened, and I'll never forget this. And he told me, never forget that this is entertainment first. And then he continued and said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And that stuck with me for a long time. I still haven't shook it off. And you have to understand that, like, if you play with those words, it doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It's all circumstance. Because just because we watch a movie and it's fiction, it's not really true, but something about it is true. It's really true. And it moves you and it inspires you in such a way to take action in your life. It's the abstract is more real than reality itself, which is like a way of saying, like, math. Math is something we use, but, like, if you try to grab it, you can't, because it's not real. It's an abstract that we use. But because we have math, we can build roads and buildings and cars and design, and we have metrics, and we have systems. So although it doesn't exist, it's more real than reality itself, and it helps it paint the world. So in one sense, you can say, man, the news is lying to you. And the other side of it is that the art form of storytelling, just because it isn't real, doesn't mean it's not true. And that's a mess with that one in your head. See how you feel about that after a cup of coffee or tea or water. So yeah, that was one of my first encounters with the career. And I've done all things: music videos, features, films, commercials, infomercials, and now on this other side of the journey, exploring the other side of the camera in acting. I mean, I've performed before, but never really, like, with dialogue and script and intention, and what is happening? But on the other side of the camera, it's helped me be more informed of what's going on in this art form on both sides of the camera, and help me fall more in love with the craft of storytelling. I bumped into somebody recently, because I know nothing about what it means to be a Filipino because I'm adopted. And I was telling them what I do. I'm a filmmaker, an actor, the art of storytelling. And they go, oh, that's pretty spot on. I was like, oh, what do you mean? They said, well, they're early Filipinos. They didn't really have a lot of things written down. So especially during times of oppression, they always expressed themselves, orally. It was always an oral tradition. So that's why you get a lot of people that, love to sing and dance, karaoke. But you get a lot of talented individuals coming out of the Filipino descent, because this is a thing that they did as tribes, as people, was they told stories. Now I dance. I definitely don't sing. I've always wanted to try it, but it makes me wonder what's possible, because I really do enjoy telling a story. And not because it's just about something that happened in my life, but just like a comedian, you pull from your own life, but how a story can transform you. It may be happening in my life, but there's something about the story that connects to you. And if you look at some of the great storytellers, they have the ability to transform people. And that's why I got into sermons, because to me, a sermon is it's an art form. It's an art form, learning how to articulate a thought, an idea, and share with an audience in hopes that they can be moved. But you have to be moved before anybody else does, and that's the tricky part. The inspiration comes from you changing. And once you're changed, then the ability to change others is a little bit more accessible, a little more tangible, I would say. So all that, the art of storytelling. Essentially, you could say, hold on. Sorry. So essentially, the opening an avenue of creating your own content for me was sermon based in the idea that I wanted to share something, an idea, a thought, some sort of story, and then it transferred into a bunch of other things, mainly because that's what was trend, that's what was out. And then I found out that my wife was pregnant with Bodhi. And I said, you know what, I've never daily vlogged. Oh, it might be a good challenge to do 100 videos before my son's born, just so that he can see who his mom and dad were before they were mom and dad. Because I thought about it. We have a lot of videos of I guess you could say my generation of like who we were as kids and who our parents were when they were parents, but we don't really know who they were before they were mom and dad. And I think that's always an interesting conversation. So if I can create a collection of work that I can share with them so they know a little bit, especially 100 days before he was born, I think that's a really special thing to have. So my love for storytelling got mixed up with one of my original crafts, which is documenting life, mixed with the art form of filmmaking. And I didn't realize that's what it was at the time. I thought I was just, making silly videos. But I have to say, when I was doing it, it was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was doing what I wanted to do, or what was in me to do. I don't want to say called to do. I do want to say I was doing something that was just who I was. And then when Bodhi was born, I wanted to jump into parenthood, and I put the camera down and I started the business because, I had to pay for, this family. And then I kind of just went off the rails from there. And ever since I stopped really putting out content is where I can say that I got lost. And now fast forward to this event that I was telling you about, I bumped into myself. And that's where things got really weird. They got scary, and I lost a lot. And I started questioning, like, what's the future like? What am I doing? What art form? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And then I started questioning, even like, am I doing acting because like to fill a void? Do I even like acting? And I had these like really weird questions. So I do know, because of my spiritual practices, when you bump into a place in your life that like feels offbeat, you got to turn the music off. And if you're not feeling it, if you're not feeling the song, you got to change the song, right? So I just turned the music off for a bit, and I just sat with myself for this whole year. This is all I've been doing. I created the rhythm and schedule just so I can sit and be, and it's taken me like I would say from birthday to birthday, coming to this place of, oh, I get it. I don't know if I'm on about this, but I'm going to share it because I do want this piece of content to be as honest as possible. I named my son Bodhi, mainly because it was a cool name. One of my favorite DJs, Bodhisattva, which is named after the enlightened one. That's what the Bodhisattva means, the enlightened one, the one who is awake. But Bodhi is a tree, and that's where the Buddha discovered enlightenment. And I have gone through a lot of different studies on that. I just thought it was such an interesting story, especially like me as a pastor. The idea of like finding God was through this suffering. I mean, that idea of a cross is not an experience anyone really wants or signs up for, but it is a part of the transformative experience. And I won't go too deep in that direction because I think that's for another conversation, even though we're still already talking about it. But I just was drawn to that concept. And I guess at the time I was what you would consider post-Christianity. Like I believed everything that I've ever learned. My early mentors were Messianic Jews, which means they were Jewish, but they believed in the Messiah. And they... one thing that they did teach me is how to read literature and not read things literally. So you read it for a deeper context, what's between the lines, what's within the text. There's so much to go, and I'm tapping into my past roots right now. But so I was just exploring, other avenues of thoughts. And this isn't to say that I didn't believe. I believe more than ever. I just stopped believing whatever traditional beliefs were sharing. And that's why I would say at the time I was post-Christianity. I didn't think that this figure, Christ, that ever meant to change the world by creating another division. I mean, he never called people Christians, so I just never made it a thing, and I wasn't taught that way. So it's a name that was put forth and became a group, a religion. And I know a lot of people say, well, I go to non-denominational and whatever. Yeah, it's just another religion, that's all. Another division between you and humanity. That's another conversation. I'll try not to get too negative about it. But anyways, in all honest thought, I wanted my son to have a different journey, I guess. And through my research, one thing that I found is that the idea of the Enlightenment was this understanding suffering. And the more that I tapped into it, I realized that the suffering is the only thing that we have in common. If you think about it, my things, my accomplishments, you can't resonate with them, right? But we all know what it feels like to be broke. We all know what it feels like to be heartbroken, to be abandoned, to be left alone, to be betrayed. Our suffering is the only thing we have in common. It's the only thing that really connects us. But how we deal with the suffering, now that's a whole nother conversation with another cup of coffee. But all through that, I guess you could say this past year has been a lot of internal suffering for me. And I got to this place where I guess you could say I realized what was the most important thing. The most important thing, and I hope that any of my work that I ever work on, whether it be pieces of content, a collection of content, or if I ever get booked for a big project and it's on the big screen or whatever, I just hope whatever I do, whatever I put my energy and my hands on, I hope it's just a reminder to spend time with your family. That is my greatest message, and that's my greatest epiphany. It's the most important thing you can ever do in your life, is just spend time with the people you love. And I said this the other day, I said, I think the most important thing is to spend time with your family, and if you're like me, you're not sure who that was for a long time, go find out, or go create it. And that's why I've dedicated so much of my life to building community through the arts. I was just trying to find family. So create it myself. When I say confused about family, it's not because my family treated me bad. Being adopted, it just comes with this weird baggage of not really knowing who you are and where you come from, and who's with me, who's against me, and I don't really fit in anywhere. So you never really have a home. I have a physical home, but a home where you lay down and you just feel like yourself, and no one's judging you and looking at you weird, or it just is. If I grew up in the Philippines, I would have just been another Filipino kid. But here, I'm a short, squinted eyes, Asian kid that grew up around not that. So I was always different. So I was always looking for some sort of connection, and family. And that's why it was confusing for me. And I think for my sisters too. We're now starting to talk about more of this stuff, which I'm really happy about. So my hope is that from now on until whenever, that the rest of my work focuses on that, and reminding others to document your journeys so you can have it and actually have it and not just out into the ether of the cosmos. I don't even know if you can put those two words together, but I just like saying big words, even if I don't know what they mean necessarily. But actually having a piece of something to hold on to, because I think it matters. It's also something that you can pass on to your family. I, as an adopted child, I always say that I'm nurture, because I don't really know what nature is in my life. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, is that nature or nurture? Did you get that from mom and dad? Or did you get that from the place that you grew up with? Now, for me, I just think that everything is nurture for me, because I'm not really sure. I don't have any context. I don't really have anything that was passed on to say, oh, you're this because of this, or someone confirm it for me. So most things that I have is just through this weird hard work ethic towards figuring it out myself. And that's all nurture from where I grew up in New York. So being able to have an opportunity to have pieces of work or a collection of content that I can pass on to my kids, it means the world to me, because now they have a reference point. Mom and dad were like this, and they were around these friends, and they were around this type of people, and they went to these events, and then they traveled here, and that's where this happened. And dad went to this Red Bull event, and he bumped into himself, and everything changed. And that's where, you have these reference points that you can share, and the story isn't blurry. I was watching the Marilyn Monroe movie, Blonde. Every adopted child should watch that, by the way. I think it's one of the most important pieces of work that exists, even if you don't understand it and it's too artistic for you. But I think it's so much more than just like a film about Marilyn Monroe. It's more of a film about how we view the idea of Marilyn Monroe. But anyway, that's another conversation. But it hit me so much, and I was also somewhat disappointed that I'll never know from the words of Marilyn Monroe what happened to her and what she went through. I only know through this art form of filmmaking from somebody else that is interpreting her life or sharing a side of the story, but it wasn't from the artist's side. So this is why this means a lot to me. It's like, what if more artists was able to create their own content, and whether they post it or they don't, but at least there's a reference point from the actual person. We wouldn't have as many questions on what happened, I guess, I started doing this thing for my son, and when Bali's born, I'll do the same thing. Every weekend, Friday through Sunday, whenever I have time, I sit down 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 minutes, and I just make a voice note to them. I just tell them what's going on in my life and how much I love them, and anything that I can pass on as far as wisdom and knowledge, and here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and I just pass it on. And I put it in a little storage, and I back it up. I back everything up like 4 times. That's just what I do. And then I, in hopes that he'll have it later on. So for me, not knowing roots in my life, it means a lot to begin new roots and to begin my family tree. And within that, now my kids in the future have a reference point of who and how and where our family comes from. And I think it's important to do the same for everybody. So, some of it will be just like raw footage and, hey, this is what happened. But a lot of my hope is to create my own perception and style of what it means to be an autobiographical lifestyle documentary journalist. Let's say it again, autobiographical lifestyle documentary journalist. Or maybe, I don't know, documenting your life. That's what I hope. I hope that that's a thing, and helping other people understand how important it is, not only just for us, but for the future. I was watching Vincent Van Gogh's movie. Um, um, Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Jeez, whatever. But something that Vincent Van Gogh believed is that the work that he was doing was for work of children that weren't born yet. Like his work wasn't going to be appreciated or known in his generation, but it would be appreciated in the future. That's crazy. That whole, sow a seed, but the harvest is not here concept, right? Wow. That messes with you. So, see if I missed any notes before I close up with you guys. When I put out my sermons, I have this one when I was ordained. I was ordained at Heartway Church in Davie, Florida. And the sermon's called The Greatest Sermon. And the concept behind it actually is that you won't remember the things that your parents did, but you'll remember how they lived. Or I would say you're not going to remember everything they say or what they tell you, but you'll remember how they lived, how they treated you and how they treated others and how they treated their own life. You'll remember that. So I think the greatest sermon you can ever live is your own life. It's learning how to navigate yourself. And I realized that the greatest life that you can ever live is what Mother Teresa said. If you want to change the world, go home and love your family. That is the greatest work that you can ever do, is just go home and love your family. So while you do it, have fun and document it. Why not? And share it. That's my hope. If people can just be inspired to do that, just go home, love your family. And if you don't know who that is, go create it, go find it, go discover it. And I'll also add to be more present with your family, spend more time with yourself. And I know that means a lot of different things for people, but I'll leave it there because I think that mystery is something that once you stumble upon it, it is an enlightening experience. And that's where I've been. Finally stumbling into age 35, realizing the most important thing of my life and my life's work. So whatever work I put my energy and my attention, my consciousness towards, I hope that I can emote that. The importance of right here, right now, and spending it with the people that you love, including yourself. Love you guys.